Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you today?
I'm very well, Brian. It's been beautiful weather here. We've had the best summer ever here in Sacramento. It just has not been that hot. Spent yesterday doing a lot of woodworking outside, which was just quite delightful. So I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Nice. Yeah, we actually had a respite from all the heat, so that's very nice. And things have cooled down. It's going to be that way for a little bit. I think you and I also have a lot of travel coming up in the next couple of weeks. And then we have a special event coming up. We're going to be in Southern California at Blue Moon Pilates. If you want to take it away and explain what we're going to be doing, teaching together.
We will be at Blue Moon Pilates, which is in Mission Viejo, Southern California, at Kelly Leonardi's studio down there. It's a beautiful space. And we'll be teaching September 13th and 14th that weekend. The first day will be a whole day on the low back. So we'll talk about extension bias and flexion bias, a bit of the theory, how it works, and then practical exercises on the mat and on all the apparatus from both a personal training and a Pilates perspective. So you'll get a lot of information, a lot of good exercises out of that. Then we'll do flexion bias in the afternoon. Yep. Sunday, we're going to do shoulder, upper body stuff for about 3 hours, and then osteoporosis for about 3 hours. Again, little theory and a lot of practical. So you get a lot of hands-on and a lot of exercises you can take home and start working on with your clients and yourself.
Yep. And I can't wait. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If you've never taken classes from the two of us, it's so much practical application that you get to take home with you that you can immediately use the next day, which is so nice. So instead of just having it be theory, there's so much of the practical. So we can't wait to do that. As we always say, please do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. We really appreciate it. About only 30% right now of people who listen to this on a regular basis are subscribers. We really would appreciate it if you would subscribe. That would be fantastic for our algorithms and all of that. I know nothing about all that stuff. All I'm told is it really helps us. So if you could, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, comment, share, all of the good stuff. And movingcombos@gmail.com is how you can get in touch with us if you have any questions or comments, as well as if you want to hit us up on Moving Combos on Instagram is how you can see us doing our thing. So, and also check us out on YouTube. We got a bunch of YouTube shorts coming out. So that's another way to see us. So today we want to sort of follow up. Last week we had an unbelievable discussion on pregnancy. That was just phenomenal, I thought. But
it was great. It was very inspiring and very enlightening.
Yeah. And we're definitely, that's a part one. Trust me, there's so much more that we can discuss on that. But the week before that, we talked a lot about the glutes. And as you said, we kind of covered the glutes as just this sort of, we didn't differentiate. It was just glutes.
The hip extensors.
Yeah. So we thought, you know what? Let's today go into it a little bit deeper and talk a little bit more about the entire posterior chain. So it's not just the glutes, as we discussed in that episode. Everybody wants to say, "Oh, the glutes," and I see that constantly in gyms now. Everybody working on their glutes, and yes, for vanity, I get it, but also they think it's the cure-all for so many things with low back and for lower body injury. Okay, so we covered a little bit of that, but let's talk about the rest of the posterior chain.
Because it all works together, as we know. And I also, like Brian, want to give a big shout out to Jennifer Gianni, who was our guest last week. If you don't know her, she is a real master in pregnancy, pre-postnatal stuff, incredibly detailed work, really great. So we're very happy to have had her, and we'll have more of her.
And if you haven't listened to that episode, please do check out her book.
Check it out.
Yeah, it's very, very good. So that episode, chock full of such great information.
All right.
So let's talk posterior chain.
So what do we mean? Brian, what is the posterior chain? Define the posterior chain for me.
Well, the posterior chain is the backside of a chain. No, sorry. Uh, Basically, when you take a look at the body, it's the muscles in the back. So when someone turns around, we're talking about those muscles. A lot of times when we refer to the posterior chain, we're talking about the erectors. We're talking about the thoracolumbar fascia, all the muscles that sort of go into the thoracolumbar fascia. We're talking about the glutes, the hamstrings, the calves, maybe even getting into the plantar flexors of the foot. Those type of things is really what we're talking about in general when we talk about posterior chain.
And what we think about there, and what we talked about a lot last time, and this is going to be just a little refinement on that, is the posterior chain can work in many different ways. It can work as an integrated whole, where everything is firing appropriately, the erectors into the glutes, into the hamstrings, into the calf, for something like a swan or a big back extension move. But very often what we find in a lot of functional moves is that different pieces of it aren't communicating well.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about last time, like the glutes, and by the glutes, we mean the glute maximus, and primarily the glute maximus and the glute medius. The glute minimus, we don't talk about so much in this context because it isn't really a hip extensor, it's a hip flexor. So we're really talking about the glute max and the glute medius, which are really, at least the posterior part of the medius, are what really creates some hip extension for us. So just to clarify that little piece. But again, how things transfer from the erector spinae into the glutes, or from the glutes into the hamstrings, or from the hamstrings into the calf, those are all places where movement can break down and cause pain, dysfunction, lack of efficiency in movement, all those kind of things.
And muscular imbalances also is something we'll discuss, because if one area sort of takes over and is a lot stronger than the other, we're going to see that. And we're going to see, something not fire when it should, and another one fire too much. So we sometimes see that as well.
Right. Muscular imbalance, mobility imbalances, all those things will really show up in this area. And some of that's structural. So some of that stuff we can not do a lot with. If somebody, for example, has a particular hip structure, they may just not have a lot of hip extension because of just how the acetabulum goes into them, or where the acetabulum is facing and how the femur sits into that. And in that case, we've got to compensate a bit. You have other people who don't have appropriate amounts of hamstring flexibility, which can limit how other things have to move or have to take up that job. So there's lots of ways in which that whole chain is a really key element of low back issues, of hip issues, of knee issues even. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring all those pieces up.
And also, all of these, if you think about the backside of the body, what is it primary in our structure in a standing position or even a seated position is for posture. They are
Right. It
all
holds us up.
working to hold us up. And without that, literally, we would be falling over all the time. These muscles need to be strong, but not only that, but also have a lot of endurance. Because if they lack that endurance to hold us upright, and we see this with a lot of our clients who have postural issues, who are round shouldered, they're kyphotic, they might have a deep lordosis, they're, flexed at the hip. They're not working the way the body was designed to keep them upright. Those curves have been accentuated in the spine. They're a little bit greater than they should be. And again, the hip flexor may be tight. They may have an anterior tilt in the pelvis. All of these things may lend itself to that poor posture. But if we're really balanced between the anterior and posterior, that should help to keep us upright and to straighten out those curves enough to keep us in that correct position.
And just to take the other side of that, this isn't just about excessive lordosis. You also have this with somebody who's super posteriorly tilted and super flexed in their low back. Like again, posture has both those ranges, and those can both be caused, both of those things can inhibit or change the action of the whole posterior chain and cause trouble.
Yeah.
So taking the first example, which is basically sort of an anterior tilt, a little bit of lordotic low back, something like that. Maybe, so a couple of things I see with those clients is a lot of times I'll see a decreased hip extension. A lot of that's because there's a tightness in the hip flexors, which inhibit or like reciprocally inhibit the hamstrings and the glutes. So that's one situation. A lot of times there we're working on mobility. So trying to get the hip the hip to have enough range of motion and extension for that whole back chain to actually fire appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Too often when we talk about anterior pelvic tilt too, people want to attack the anterior portion of it and they want to just stretch the hip flexors. That becomes sort of the initial thing for what I hear oftentimes, coming from physical therapists is you got to stretch those hip flexors. And I'm not saying they're not tight, but there's other components to this, not just let's stretch out the hip flexors, because that doesn't
From a
solve
back,
everything.
it does, and it also that can be a long process. I mean,
Mhm.
changing somebody's habitual posture there and even loosening up the hip flexors, I've never found that to be a quick and dirty solution to anything.
Mm-mm.
Right. I find the hip flexors tend to be on the short. If they're on the short side for somebody, they're on the short side for that person. And it takes consistency and time to really change that range of motion through just loosening up the hip flexors.
Okay,
Has that been
I
your
want to,
experience too? Yeah.
yeah, and I'm going to take a slight detour, and I just want to know your opinion on this. Strengthening versus lengthening. I've always found that it's almost easier to activate and strengthen a muscle and get something stronger than it is to create a permanent change in length by stretching.
Absolutely.
If
Yes.
because
Yeah.
tight
Absolutely.
hamstrings, tight hip flexors, they take a long period of time to do that. Whereas if I get someone who, especially who has not been doing any weight training whatsoever, fairly sedentary, I can get them to gain strength. I can activate the muscle and get them to gain strength fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And within 6 months, they've gained a significant amount of strength. Whereas lengthening takes a long time. It's not
Yeah.
something that
No, I
happens
think
overnight.
no. And even in somebody who really hasn't ever, like they've never addressed that area, but you start off
Mhm.
with that. It takes consistency too. It's like you have to
Mhm.
address that mobility limitation, I think a minimum of 3 times a week. If
Oh, yeah.
it's, every day, a lot of times with some of my clients with really tight hamstrings, really tight hip flexors, I suggest every day. And I will see changes.
Mhm.
But those changes 2 months, 1 month,
Yeah.
2 months,
Takes
3
time.
months. Yeah, it's not the strength will like go like this in those 3 months, and mobility will kinda go, "Yeah, I'm better." Right?
I'm just
It's
thinking
just a very different curve.
it's a
A
very
lot
different
flatter
curve,
curve.
a
Yeah,
lot flatter.
yeah,
And those are microscopic changes. You and I will see
yeah.
them as instructors. We'll see a change because how many times have I been stretching someone's hamstrings, for instance, and I'll see that they've gone from 60 degrees to 65 degrees or 70 degrees in the last 6 months. But all they feel is, "Oh my gosh, it hurts every time you do it." They don't see that there's been a
Right,
change.
right.
But I say, "Oh my gosh, in 6 months, you've increased 10 degrees. That's pretty significant." To them, it's like, "Well, I can't kick my leg over my head." So they don't see that as much as, "Oh, I went from 5 pounds to 10 pounds." That's a little bit more objective in their head. It's more, boom, I could see it. I can see the
Well,
change.
you can see the change, you can feel the change because 'cause you're lifting up something different, right? Or you're moving
Yes.
something different, or you have more springs on if you're in the reformer, for example. But with mobility, the other challenge too is that with mobility, you tend to push to the same sensation every time.
Exactly, that end
Right. If
feel.
I'm stretching my hamstrings, I'm stretching them to that feeling of I'm stretching every time. And that sensation doesn't necessarily change, even if my
Yeah.
range of motion gets better.
Yep.
Right. I may notice that functionally or certain exercises are easier once I get the mobility. But if I'm just actively stretching, like I feel that, and I'm going to keep feeling that no matter how far I go, as
Where
long
I
as I'm
go.
at the
Yeah.
stretch range.
Yep.
So that's part of it too, is the sensation is really different there.
Yeah. I just was curious if you saw the same thing. So, yeah, if you're working on just stretching the hip flexors, you have to just give it time, consistency and time and proper technique, I'm going to say, because a lot of people just sort of lunge into it and they're not really stretching what they think they are necessarily. So, proper technique has a lot to do with it as well. But again, that's not the end all be all when it comes to correcting anterior pelvic tilt and lordosis.
No, so thinking about again, you do have to have the range of motion to achieve the posture you want. If you're
Mhm.
trying to achieve a certain posture, and if you don't have the range of motion because of tightness or whatever, you can't get there. But you can certainly compensate and sort of work towards that. But thinking about that, thinking about how else you're going to work on that. Some of it is working dynamically through the range of motion. So, for example, with hip flexion into extension, working that full range dynamically,
Mhm.
bringing the knee into the chest and then reaching it back behind you, whether you've got resistance on it. Maybe you're doing that with something like a single leg knee stretch on the reformer, going from, pretty tight hip flexion into hip extension. Oftentimes I find that moving the hips from flexion to extension, there's a funny challenge there for a lot of
Mhm.
clients. They can flex all day or they can extend all day, but going from flexion through into extension, where they really have to change what muscles are working and how they're working,
Mhm.
is another way that I work on mobility and on correcting the posterior chain all at the same time. Because
Yeah.
rather than just doing a static hip flexor stretch, which I will sometimes do, I work a lot more on full dynamic range from flexion into extension in parallel, maybe in turned out in different positions. And I often find that both helps with mobility and also helps to get that coordination of flexion into extension working a little bit better and that whole posterior chain waking up.
Also, people have a tendency to move with the muscles that they're used to.
Of course,
So if they're
we all
going
do what's easy.
exactly. So when I take someone into an extension position, what I often will see is they dump into their lumbar spine because that's what's been working overtime for however many years this is. So they're going to fall into those usual patterns and take the path of least resistance. So a lot of times it's just, like you said, getting the proper muscles to work in the correct timing. They've got hip flexion for days and they come back into it and they get to a certain point, and usually I find it's right at that neutral state when the leg is straight down that they begin to arch their back and really take that over. And I'm not seeing the hamstrings and I'm not seeing the glutes fire nearly as much as it should. They have a tendency just to want to arch. So that's something we need to watch out for, is really focusing on the joint mobility and the joint that needs to move instead of just the motion itself, because they can achieve the motion. But again, is it the correct joint that you want to move? If it's the hip
Right,
joint you
exactly.
want, then you really have to have them focus on that.
Yep, exactly. And that's where we look at again finding hip extension from the hip as opposed to from the lumbar spine. Right. That's those are really classic two pieces that don't always work together. So it's very tight in the hip flexors that go into hip extension, and oftentimes they will substitute the low back. So
Yep.
that's working on, and this is where we talked a little bit about this last time, but that's where I find a lot of times the core isn't working right to support the torso. And the core isn't supporting the low back. So oftentimes in
Mhm.
those clients, this is just this particular client. They aren't all like this. But what I see with that is there's a tension in the erectors. The low back is being used for extension all the time. And oftentimes the abdominals are not very active. They're not able to really bring that abdominal connection in and neutralize that excessive
Mhm.
lordosis. And that can also be from mobility in the spine. Some clients have very poor mobility in the spine as well, and they really don't have a lot of flexion even capable in the spine. It can be either a joint issue in the spine or it can be from tight hip flexors and other things. But that's another way to like kind of work on that, is how do I get that low back to kind of come into a better position or stay stable as I'm working the hip extensors to take the work out of the lumbar extensors and into the hip extensors.
And I think a good place that I will move people toward is getting them to do that, focusing on their core, focusing on whatever the weak link is. Because again, we're talking about a kinetic chain here. We're talking about the posterior chain. So when you're looking at the chain, as they go into extension, are they dumping into their low back? Well, to me, that would be the weak link in that chain. So now I need to make sure their core is firing enough to keep their pelvis stable enough so that their hip can move dynamically through its own range of motion and be able to work through flexion and extension. Whereas if that's not their weak link, which sometimes they may have a spine that's just way too mobile and they'll be going from super flexion to super extension anyway. So then they need to focus on that. Other times they have too much hip extension or too much hip flexion. And then that's what we need to focus on. So getting them to really cue in on what needs to be what they need to be aware of holding in place when we're trying to move. And I hate to even use the word holding in place, but dynamically stabilize that area while you're moving another area around, when you're working on mobility of the hip, to be able to stay, keep some dynamic stability of, or dynamic control of, that pelvis and of the lumbar spine. So becoming aware of that area, I think, is vitally important.
And this brings up a really key thing here. We talked about it a bit last time, but just to bring it up a little more clearly, there are, again, as with any issue like this, there are kind of two primary patterns. One is excessive tightness and limited range of motion, right? In the hip flexors, in the low back, and wherever it's happening. The other one is hypermobility. So in other words, excessive range of motion in the lumbar. So a client has more options in terms of where they can be. And I don't mean technically hypermobile. Okay, so let me be really clear on that. I'm just talking about basically people who have more mobility. If somebody is working on stiffness, that is not an easier place. It takes a long time to change that, but basically I can make slow progress towards, okay, I'm getting a little more range, a little more range, a little more range, and work through it. When somebody is super loosey-goosey and everything can be anywhere, then I've got to really work on proprioception, like where am I in space and how do I hold this together? Because that's another issue with the whole posterior chain, is if it isn't working right, it can do a couple things. On the opposite side of the lordosis and the tight hip flexors, I can have somebody who is super posteriorly tilted, very flat in their lumbar spine, very kind of shoved forward with their femurs, and often very short in their hamstrings, because they're getting that whole stability of the posterior chain from that hamstring tightness, holding things together from the back. The glutes are not necessarily working, the erectors are not working, like nothing else is working, but those hamstrings are doing that whole job of holding that stability of the back and holding them upright. So again, I wanted to bring in those two different sides because they're very different. And working with them, I work with them both in completely different ways.
You have to. I mean, there's no question. The human body, I think, prefers stiffness, prefers to be almost overly stable, because it's in a safer position, which is why a lot of times when we're injured, we clamp down. Everything gets super tight and it clamps down.
Yeah.
When someone is the opposite and has too much mobility, whether it be any joint, that's a lot more difficult sometimes to work with, because you really have to establish safe ranges of motion, appropriate ranges of motion for certain things. For instance, in this situation, if they're loosey-goosey in their pelvis as well as their lumbar spine, taking them into a lunge position, well, are they going to feel it where we need them to feel? Or are they going to be arching their back too much? Are they going to be going into way too much extension of their hip and back and really not doing what we need it to do? There's so many different things that we have to control and get them aware on. Whereas if someone who's tight, it's like, okay, I'll just restrict their range of motion, and slowly over time we'll increase that. It's a little easier.
Yeah, so it's a little more straightforward, I think.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It can still take some time, but it's more. The other thing too is a stable joint is a happier joint, and those of you who come from the yoga or the Pilates, the dance background, like we've talked about this earlier. We have such a bias towards mobility, and that's great until it's not. Like mobility that's well supported and strong and balanced is fabulous. Mobility that's just mobility leads to sloppiness in the joints, extra wear and tear, earlier hip replacements, all those kind of things. So again, our bias towards mobility is great in some ways, but you really have to balance it with stability and strength and awareness. So
yeah. So when talking about the posterior chain, we're not just talking about them individually. It's really an integration, I find, which is why I thought this would be a good topic for today, is because when you're just isolating the glutes alone, it's fine. That's one muscle group. Sometimes you need to activate it and get it firing. Ta-da, we talked about that before. But to integrate that with the hamstrings, to integrate the hamstrings with the gastroc, to integrate the glutes with the erector spinae all the way up. Because again, a lot of people have a tendency to think just lumbar spine. Well, no, we have our thoracic, we have it through the cervical, we have the whole thing. And then if we want to talk about even the shoulder and the scapula, that can even, lend itself to part of that. So there's a lot more to it. And getting it integrated really is what's going to give better quality of movement.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that. One of the things I think about is so thinking about the erector spinae and how those connect into that back chain. Um, Something that I play with a lot is just having people understand when the erectors are firing and when they're not. So if somebody's standing up, for example, they're just standing up and they're standing there. For most people, there is some tone in those erectors just to
Mhm.
keep them standing upright. Now, some clients you'll feel that it's like those erectors are working really hard. And sometimes it's kind of, they're a little more squishy. And that's just to maintain that upright posture. So very
Mhm.
often with a client, have them put their hands on those big muscle bands on either side of kind of their waist area and just tilt forward and tilt back, or even tilt side to side or make little circles and feel how those erectors are responding to those changes in balance, right? To those changes in weight shift, for example, because the erectors will start to respond to that. And one of the things that I work on a lot with my low back clients is balanced work through the erectors. That they're not overworking, they're not underworking, and they're working relatively symmetrically on either side.
Mm, mhm.
So that's that's kind of one piece of that, because if somebody's overactive there, that does certain things, creating that tension through the whole back chain. If somebody's underactive, that definitely creates just less support for the spine. And
Mhm.
then, working through getting the back extensors to work evenly and smoothly is really useful.
I think evenly is a key. How many times have we seen someone's low back and you put their hands on each side and one side is woo, massive and the other side is nothing? Yeah, it's
Exactly.
dead.
Yeah.
It's like a dead
Yeah.
fish, and you're feeling it going, "Why is this
Yeah.
side not working?" But the other side is clamped down, and some of those clients, you'll even see the beginnings of or continued, functional scoliosis where the bigger side is actually pulling that side into a little bit of side flexion, and the rest of the
Yeah.
spine has to compensate. So we see that sometimes, and that really can be a trick to stretch out, to get balanced again between right and left, because if you everyone wants to put them into extension work, but guess what? The side that's already working is just going to keep working. And the other side is going to say, well, I don't have to. Bye-bye.
Right. And one of the things that I know you and I do a lot of work with is asymmetrical movement.
Hmm.
Right? Is kind of like if I'm trying to balance the erector spinae and I'm just going to do a whole bunch of swan type exercises, whatever that is, or back extension exercises, the strong side will keep being the strong side forever, because that's how our
Hmm.
bodies work. They go for the easiest solution to most problems. Oh, I've got
Yep.
to lift up. Okay, my strong side's going to take over. I'm done. So playing with things like, for me with back extension, I do a bunch of things. One is supporting one leg, for example. So if I want to increase that whole back chain, I might have them really think about extending through, let's say, their left leg, whether the leg is straight or not, depending what exercise you're doing, but extend through the left hip to try to activate more through those left erector spinae, and
Yep.
not do the same thing on the right. This is getting a little wacky, guys, but basically trying to find ways to activate those less active areas.
Hmm.
I've had really good. I can think of two clients particularly that's all I worked on for their low back pain. One was a carpenter, a right-handed carpenter,
Mm-hmm.
whose right erector spinae were like woof, and left were like woof. And we just worked on getting the left to fire. That's all we did for like about 6 weeks, and his back pain went way down, and his comfort level went way up. But we did it by all these weird asymmetrical moves. Lift just your left arm, lift just your,
Yep.
your left leg. I'm going to put some pressure down here, feel that isometric all the way up through the chain. Did lots of different funny things to try to get that side to fire.
And how you could create this on your own is it's going to require you to put your hands on the client, is as they're doing certain movements, change their foot position, stagger their foot, 1 foot forward, one back, put your hand on it. Is it firing? Is it not? Change the position, put your hand on it again. Maybe it's a type of rowing exercise where they're pulling something to them
Mm.
or pushing away or pulling something from the side, or change the angle a little bit. A lot of it's going to be investigative on your part to see what
Yeah.
makes it fire fastest. I'll
Yes.
like to do something like I'll put a weight in their hands, a small medicine ball, or even like a soccer ball or something, and have them do figure eights in front of their body and take it to the sides of their body. And what I'll see is as they're doing that, their erector, one side will fire, then the other side will fire. Well, when I can feel the side that I need firing stronger, I'll just have them continue to do that side to wake it up. The other side's working a little bit, but I find what is going to work it the most and focus on that side to keep it awake, keep it alive, keep it firing, to remind it, hey, you got a job to do here too. So it's a lot of investigative work on your part.
And it takes you got to do tactile feedback unless they're or shirtless or
Absolutely.
wearing like a sports bra or something, because you really can't see this. You got to feel it.
Yeah.
And it's not a lot of tactile work, but you've got to like go, okay, what is happening with those muscles? And then what I do, it sounds like what you do too, is like I find the one or two things that really activate that, and it's
Yeah.
different for every client, or there's a lot of variations on how that works. And then I have them do that every day. I give them something really simple they can do every day. Maybe it's standing on their right leg when they brush their teeth, something simple.
Yep.
Or lifting up, like holding a weight in their right arm while they're doing something, just something to kind of get that to fire. And then I will have them also come in, and we do that before we do all the other exercises. So I try to wake it up first, then we'll do arm work and footwork and, back work and all the other things we do, trying to keep it awake through everything. That's kind of the plan.
Yeah. Absolutely. Activate it. Then once it's woken up, but I will say this, don't overload it. You want to wake it up, but don't fatigue it.
It's a good morning. It's give them their first cup of coffee. You're not having them run a marathon, right? Just like wake them up, give them their first cup of coffee, and then see if you can just keep that going, keep participating basically in the other exercises you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once you wake that up, then it's like, oh, okay, we got this. And they'll help out. Are they going to be working as strongly as the other side? Probably not. But at least they've woken up. They're starting to help out. Then I will try and find some unilateral moves. For instance, sort of a side plankish sort of thing, or an overhead where I'm being pulled from the side, just to get that side firing a little stronger. And I may do 3 sets on one side, 1 set on the other, because the other side's already fairly strong. But I don't want to create an over imbalance either. So I try and make sure I do both sides, but I'll just increase the one side a little bit more, and just to try and get it a little bit stronger. But I'm going to say this, I've gotten people incredibly functionally that they're the same from a functional standpoint and a strength standpoint. And I still have one side that's still a little bit more hypertrophy than the other.
Oh, and
because that's years and years. You talked about, baseball pitcher throwing for years, or a carpenter, or a mechanic who's just used their, one side for their body for so many years. That side's pretty much going to be over hypertrophied forever.
Yeah, or somebody who's right-handed, or who even has a desk job where they're mousing with like their posture is posture. They always sleep on their right side. Like all kinds of things that we do every day create that. Yeah, and me too. It's like, but what I found for actually the 3 clients I'm thinking of is even just getting that other side to fire a little bit. Like it didn't actually take a lot to take a lot of stress off their back. So I mean, getting to full balance probably would have taken years. But just getting that side to fire and helping them to understand how to fire it, like that made a huge difference just all by itself. So it's really nice.
And when we're talking about balancing that out, we can also talk about balancing out the hamstrings, because not only are we talking right to left, we're also talking medial to lateral, because think about your lumbar spine is pretty, straightforward. You got one on the right, you got one on the left. Boom, you can see that. Well, your hamstrings, you also, each side has one on the right and one on the left of the femur. And it's not as apparent unless you have someone who's very lean and very muscular. It's hard to sort of see visually just from the bellies of the muscle, which side is firing stronger. Sometimes you have to do it like we talked last time about visual cues. Is their toes turned out? Is it turned in? Right above the knee, you can see those tendons. Is one side firing more than the other? There are certain visual cues you can take, but it's not as apparent necessarily as seeing a big side erector spinae and a, wimpier side erector.
So let's talk about hamstring balance. Talk erector spinae balance, talk a little bit about hamstring balance. Couple things. So first of all, right, the hamstrings both attach to the same point on the sit bone. So they have the same origin essentially. But then one comes down to the medial side of the knee, one comes down to the lateral side of the knee. And that's where things really get a little wacky. So sometimes the easiest place for me to see an imbalance in the hamstrings is a rotation in the tibia.
Mm-hmm.
Because the lateral hamstring is going to laterally rotate the tibia relative to the femur, more or less, and a dominant medial hamstring will often medially rotate the tibia relative to the femur, relatively. Now, that's just one way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
In America, in our society, most of the people that I work with are lateral hamstring dominant.
Yes.
I mean, that's occasionally I see the other one, but not so often. In Asia, it's a lot more common to be medially rotated in the tibia, but
Mm.
here, lateral rotation of the tibia is like many, many, many clients. I'd say definitely the majority, but the vast majority.
Yeah.
So, and we talked about this last time, but like the test I often do is prone, just having a client from a prone position bend their knee and notice what happens to their foot. For most
Mm-hmm.
clients, their foot turns out. And trying to keep that even just in that exercise, if they can see themselves in a mirror, for example, let's say they're doing single leg kicks in prone on the mat, and they can look and they can see, trying to just keep that heel straight and keep that foot straight will immediately activate that medial hamstring.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Adding an internal rotation to an extension lift, for over the ball or something, right? And you're lifting, you're just doing straight leg lifts, and having them just internally rotate the feet and they lift up. It's like, whoa! So a lot of them are going to like immediately feel that medial hamstring, and you'll see it. You'll see that
Yep.
that starts to activate a little bit more too.
And how you can do it on yourself, I find one of the easiest is in a standing position, keeping your knees about the same level. Just bend your knee. So your
Yeah,
foot's going to go behind you. And yes, you're going to have to look back over your shoulder. But as you look back, does your toe turn out? If you have good
yeah,
proprioception, as soon as you take that foot back, you're going to say, oh, yeah, it does. It's turned out. For some people, again, very few, we're going to have it turned in. But for occasionally, I'll see a straight ahead. But I'd say 75 to 80% of my people
it
are
turned
going to
out.
turn out. And so
Yep.
that lateral hamstring is so much stronger and just more active. And I say, maybe I have 1% that it turns in, maybe 2%.
Yeah.
It's very rare. It's either straight ahead or it's turned out. And for the most part, it's turned out.
Yep, I agree. And sometimes clients can turn it straight and sometimes they can't. Because sometimes there's also just a joint structure issue in terms
Yeah.
of just tibial torsion, or there's tibial torsion in a bone, like a twist of the tibia that leads to some of that lateral rotation as well. One other thing that I sometimes play with is if you're sitting, some of you may be sitting now, I put my
I love
hands
this.
just behind my knee, and you can feel a big chunk of tendon on the right side or the medial side, and a big chunk of tendon on the lateral side. And if I internally rotate my foot, my tibia, basically, I'm going to feel that medial hamstring pop up. And if I laterally rotate, I'm going to feel that lateral hamstring pop up, because the outside, and we're looking at my biceps femoris tendon on the inside, kind of semimembranosus and semitendinosus working together. And sometimes
Yep.
you'll feel like when somebody does that, like I've had clients who have absolutely no connection on that medial side at all.
I was just
It's like
saying,
it's
I'm
just
just thinking that.
mush.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So that's another sign. It's like, oh, they got nothing. Like either they
Yep.
can't medially rotate their tibia because those muscles are so inactivated, or there's no activation, in your fingers.
Yeah. I've had a number of students when I've taught big classes and I teach that move just to see how many people I'll say, turn your toes out. How many of you feel that tendon? Every hand goes up. Now
Yeah,
medially rotate. How many of you feel it? And you see about half the class's hand goes up and the rest are going, what do you mean? And it's like, yeah,
yeah.
there should be something there. There really
Right.
should be something
It's not
there.
that subtle when it's working. So if you don't
Yes.
feel it, it's not working. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
So then we just think about, like, what does that do? So if I often think about bodies as being kind of posterior chain dominant or anterior chain dominant, and
Hmm.
that's a very rough concept. But very often we are laterally rotated. Our tibias are laterally rotated. Our lateral legs are working a little bit harder. Oftentimes our glutes are not working in spite of all that.
Hmm.
Right. And then maybe our back muscles are working and our front body isn't going. But again, balancing that out, number one, and really importantly, changes the forces that go through the knee.
Hmm.
So if you've got a client
Yes.
with a knee issue and their hamstrings are that imbalanced, just think about what that's constantly doing in terms of a torque on the knee.
Every step.
So, every step, every run, every walk, every going upstairs, like all of those are going to be this constant kind of twisting and torquing of that tibia on the femur. So
Yep.
working on getting that medial lateral hamstring balance is useful. And a little like the erectors, it doesn't take much to wake those up.
Nope. I mean, one of my favorite things, and this is an exercise that I have been doing for years, and so it can be called many different things. I have a little mechanic stool that I put people on, and we have a long hallway, and I just have them sitting low. So they're low to the ground, they're below 90 degrees, and they just walk down the hall using their hamstrings to pull them.
Pulling, right? Pulling them, yeah, pull themselves
Pulling,
forward.
pulling, pulling every repetition. I mean, and we got a very long hallway. I can tell you, I'm the only person that ever made it all the way down the hall. And it's because I wouldn't stop. It was burning like you wouldn't believe, but I had to be able to tell a client that I could do it. But I went down and I noticed that about halfway there, my feet naturally began to turn out.
They're finding something. Give me
Whatever
something.
they
Give me
could.
help. Yeah.
And now I'm really focusing when I work with clients to balance these out. So I'll tell them, keep your feet straight ahead, keep them straight ahead. I don't overcorrect because I find when I do that, they have a tendency to get a little in the knee and I don't want to do
It can
that.
get irritating. No, you
It
you
gets
don't
real
overcorrect. But
irritated.
just think about keeping it straighter than you naturally would, which might be here to here. May not be
Exactly.
here. Right. It might be just if this is where you want to be, just bring it in. I say 5 degrees. I make up a number, but just bring it in just a touch. Just bring it in as much as you can that's still comfortable.
Well, I've told you this story before. The first Pilates instructor I ever had, she put me on the reformer to do footwork. And she said, put your feet parallel. And of course, I'm lying down. I'm looking straight up at the ceiling. I said, okay. She goes, okay, now put your feet parallel. Okay. Now put your feet parallel. They are. And she said, look at them. And sure enough, they were turned out to 10 and 2 o'clock. And my eyes got huge. And she said, you didn't even know that, did you? I said, wow. Because you're not aware until some of these things are pointed out to you. You really are not aware.
Yeah.
And I was able to correct that over, a session or two is more of an awareness and really focusing on that. But that really was an eye-opening experience for me. And it has been for my clients doing it either on the reformer or even doing bridges, having them do, hamstring curls on the ball. Every one of them turn their toes out. So I'll have them put their toes together and suddenly they can't do it. Balancing that out is very important. And it's something that really needs to be addressed. Started out simple, but then begin to work on that. I think one of the easiest things that I do to start it out with is just, like I said, to test yourself, to try and stand there and bring your heel to your butt. I'll have them do toe out, then toe in, toe out, toe in. There's no resistance.
Right.
And
just gravity.
It's just gravity, but it fatigues. They'll find the toe out, no problem. Toe in, man, you can just see them after 5 or 6 repetitions, it's getting tired. And then I'll have them do something seated with their foot on a little tray or something, pulling back a slider. And I'll say, oh, keep your toes straight ahead. Don't turn out. And you'll be surprised at how many clients can't do it and how it's going to be challenging and fatiguing for that medial hamstring.
So those are great. Those are both really just easy, simple, stupid, which I love always. Because if you can give a client, again, the one thing they can do anywhere that will wake up that sleepy area and encourage them to do, 5 reps every day or whatever it is. That's often the best way to really make change, is give them something very simple they can do anywhere, not a lot of reps every day. That's oftentimes a good strategy. A way that I work with that in the Pilates environment is, number one, to add internal rotation to things, because that's not part of a lot of the traditional repertoire. Medial rotation is not in any of the exercises really. And I'll do it in simple ways. So in footwork, I'll have people, and a lot of times, so Brian pointed out that, many people are just naturally laterally rotating their lower leg, right? And to bring them even to parallel is a challenge. And if I've got somebody who really does have that tibial torsion, I'll say, okay, just bring it in a hair. So keep the hip to the knee aligned. And this is the other key thing on that particular cue. Keep the hip to the knee aligned and bring the foot in just as much as you can, maintaining the hip and knee alignment. If you overcorrect that, usually their knees knock in their footwork. right? And that's not what you're looking for this purposes. So that's one thing, is just finding that. And sometimes I'll actually have them turn in if they've got that capability. And I might have them with the heels wide at the foot bar, just bring the toes in and then push back and forth, really an internal rotation. Most clients can do it fairly comfortably. I've got to really watch the ankles, that they're not doing weird things, keep the hip and the knee and the ankle aligned. But that's a really simple way to do that. Same thing with bridging. So with a bridge on the reformer, I might have them just hold something between their big toe joints. Like I'll put a ball or a box or something between the feet. So they're not even internally rotated. They're just putting some pressure towards medial rotation, because they may be parallel, but just pushing into the big toe joint. And that will really activate that medial hamstring pretty immediately. The other one that's actually simpler and not so uncomfortable is to have people do internal rotation in any feed-in straps, whether it's on the Cadillac or on the reformer. Just, turn out, turn in, and really work on that internal rotation with a straight leg. Because we do a lot of hamstring work for that balance with a bent knee, which is great. But sometimes I like to do it with a straight leg as well. And that's my place to do it with a straight leg.
Yeah. This reminds me, on the reformer, one of the things that I'll do with some people is have them just sit on the foot bar and take the carriage off. I mean, take all the weight off the carriage and put one foot on the carriage, or both feet on the carriage, whichever one.
And push
Normally
it out,
one foot.
pull it back.
Push it out, pull it back, foot straight, foot straight, foot straight. And you'd be surprised at how fatiguing, because the weight of the carriage isn't that much and it has very little resistance. But after 10 or 15 repetitions of pulling that in from a fully extended knee position, you'd be surprised at how many people think, oh my gosh, it's burning already. And again, keep that foot straight up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's something just to think about. And it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. And all those things are things you can add into, again, I think about, Brian and I often work individually, so we have more leeway to play with crazy stuff. But all these things are things you can add into a group class. I mean, just add internal rotation into a group class, or add that foot position, or add a little something between the toes. All those things are simple to add in a group class too. So those of you who are working with those clients, knowing that that's a really common imbalance, that medial lateral hamstring, just play with stay parallel or even slightly internally rotated.
I remember doing feet-in straps and having one of my Pilates instructors here say, okay, we're going to put this, one of the yoga blocks, between your toes. And I was thinking, okay, how hard is this? First of all, I had a hard time keeping it there. My adductors were fried, but my medial hamstrings were on fire just doing feet-in strap. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. As because she noticed I naturally wanted to turn out. So again, something that should be fairly easy to think about, most people don't. And when it's brought to their attention on how weak that area is, oh my gosh, it can really change. And it made a change in me fairly quickly.
And it does. A lot of times you just haven't thought about it. I mean, this is one where I do find that the change is fairly quick. Just waking it up a little bit and things can straighten out, with some alacrity. I also, I want to really encourage this too. Again, knee issues for sure. Hip issues also for sure. But if you've got somebody who's an athlete, who's a running, cycling, kind of a triathlete, running, cycling athlete, particularly, like that balance is really important to long-term health in both of those activities. I probably said this before. I spend a lot of time watching runners. It's just one of those things, because I bike along this American River Trail here in Sacramento, which is fabulous. And there's always people running along the sides of the trail, always. And I'm just like looking at them, and so many are doing that little flippy thing, right, with their ankle. And this kind of brings us down to number one, that's a hamstring imbalance for sure. But number two, it's also getting into the calves and a calf imbalance also. And that's another place that I see people really lose that connection on that posterior chain, is through the balance of the medial and lateral calf. So that's another place to kind of think about how we balance it out. And a lot of it is everything we've done is going to work on the calf as well. So I think we've addressed a lot of the exercises for that.
And when you think of if you think of the whole posterior chain, I mean, you said it when we talked about posture. When you see someone externally rotated, or their foot is turned out, a lot of times what you're going to see is that their femurs are rotated outward as well, and that the
Mhm.
femurs are riding forward in the hip socket. Their pelvis is often riding forward, and I say almost splayed out, like their hip wants to open up from the anterior. And that puts a lot of compression in the lumbar spine. But it's sort of like, instead of having muscles have their normal tonicity to hold you upright, it's almost as though you took all that out and just sort of let your body hang there on the ligament structures and just a few of the muscles holding on, like you said, the hamstrings. So we see these things as patterns. And by just correcting a couple of these things to, again, wake up that medial hamstring, wake up the erectors, getting those femurs to want to center themselves a little bit more, and just getting a little bit of balance, you'll be surprised at how everything sort of can begin to find its balance point again, where it should be. It doesn't take, a ton of cueing. Just a couple of those cues can begin to bring things back into proper alignment.
And just to pound this nail on the head again, make small corrections. When you've got somebody who's really laterally rotated in either the femurs or the tibia or
Yep.
both, make it again, just come in a little bit, just come into the point where you don't feel like it distorts the whole leg, right?
Yes.
Like, okay, because I know sometimes when I've got somebody like, let's say in footwork on the reformer and their lower leg is turned out, I'll just say, okay, just bring your feet to more parallel. And I only have them bring it in as far as they can without the knees then knocking together.
100%.
Right. So it's kind of like, how much can you actually move that lower leg? Because there should be a good bit of a range of motion and mobility in most people's ankles, because functionally, before we had shoes and concrete sidewalks, our ankles had to take up the unevenness of whatever surface we're walking on, roots or sand or rocks or whatever. Now, of course, we don't have those challenges in our ankles, which often makes our ankles and feet super weak, which is another topic. But basically, like, without that ability to actually have that mobility, you really can cause a lot of trouble all the way up the chain. So the other piece is really looking at mobility of the ankle.
Yeah. And you said it perfectly. Small changes, small adjustments. You don't want to go overboard. And we all have a tendency, I think, to want to see dramatic results, because we all want to be able to wave our magic wand. I mean, I've got mine right here. Don't you have yours?
Exactly.
You wave your magic wand and everybody's fixed.
Right.
But we want to sort of see that, but we have to remind ourselves that if I can get a millimeter every session, well, guess what? In 6 months, I've made a significant change, a massive change to their body, because that millimeter is going to work up the chain. If I'm
Yeah.
seeing a millimeter of change at their foot, that's going to amplify as it goes up the chain.
Yep.
So a lot of times the smaller adjustments are perfect. It's just for today. Make that small adjustment. Make that small adjustment. Don't expect too much too soon. Watch to make sure the rest of their alignment is correct. Make sure they're not, distorting their bodies in any way, shape, or form. Like you said, knock knees. Make sure they're not doing that. And you'll be surprised at, over a consistent period of time, it has to be consistent, but over a period of time, you're going to see some significant changes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So working into hamstrings, we have to live with erectors, and then thinking again about posture. So bring this back to kind of that global, how the whole body works together. When I think about getting the medial hamstrings going, that also tends to activate the adductors. So those tend to just have a strong relationship with each other. The adductors work on the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor works on the transverse abdominis, right? So it's like there's also a way in which, when you balance out the hamstrings, you can influence the core all the way up into the torso. And, like we talked about influencing the erectors, the back of the body, you can also influence the front of the body by getting that balance through the hamstrings and that balance through the hip alignment and the leg alignment.
Yep. Absolutely. Now, I think that the only other thing that I want to touch on is, let's work up the body one more spot and talk about the thoracic and going into the cervical a little bit, because that is part of the posterior chain. And it's something that I think, especially the thoracic, because we don't tend to think about extension through there. And there are some of us, myself included, that really don't have real true extension. I go from flexion towards neutral, but in a Caucasian body, we don't see a whole lot of extension through our thoracic spine, some of us, that we really want to think about focusing on getting those muscles strong and balanced as well. Balance from right to left and making sure that they are firing and firing properly.
And just to put a finer point on that, because we tend to be right-handed, because we do so much with, our upper body posture is asymmetrical all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Our lower body posture can be, we can stabilize that, sit on both sit bones, have your legs straight ahead, blah, blah, blah. Upper body, if you're mousing, texting, hanging out at a computer, writing, cooking, chopping, doing like manual labor with like tools, none of that is bilaterally symmetrical.
Nope.
For the most part. So, and that influences the superficial layers of the back, right? The lats and the trapezius, and some other muscles in there. And that'll also influence, like, are those erectors firing or not? Brian mentioned early on the thoracolumbar fascia, right? The lat comes down, connects to the thoracolumbar fascia. The thoracolumbar fascia surrounds our erectors, our lats, even has little connections to our psoas, connections out into our transverse, right? All those pieces. So that those asymmetries feed into the thorax, feed into the erector spinae, feed all the way down the chain. Yep. And that's a whole bigger conversation, is balancing out the upper body, because it takes constant vigilance.
Oh, it does. It does. And you said it. We are asymmetrical creatures. So I am big when I work with clients on doing unilateral work, doing asymmetrical work. It's really important, because you're going to find one side. I was just working with someone she's in great shape. And we found one side is definitely significantly weaker than the other. One side, no problem. The other side was like, well, and you could see the confusion on her face. Why is this not as strong?
Why is this
and it
not
wasn't
happening?
it wasn't just not as strong, but not as coordinated, not as fluid. It felt like there's a hitch in her giddy up. And it's like, look, you're right-handed. It makes sense that your left side would be a little bit less. And if you have someone who does, a sport, an activity, if they're a golfer, they're swinging only one direction. If they are a baseball player, they're swinging primarily in one direction. Those asymmetries can really create, and we can see them down the road. So even if I've worked with someone who was an athlete in high school or college, I'm seeing them in their 40s. They're still going to have some of that, remnant, asymmetry to their body 20 years later.
Oh, yeah.
Because they've been ingrained for so many years.
Yeah.
So I find that adding some asymmetrical work, and over time, they become a lot more fluid on that side, and they feel better. And they're like, oh yeah, this feels more natural. And sometimes it takes, 4 to 6 weeks. And other times it takes 4 to 6 months. It can take some time.
Or it can take a lifetime. In my case, it can take a lifetime. I got one leg that's longer than another, and it's a lifetime. That left leg is that shorter leg is like, why do I have to work, really? Like, it's not a good idea. So Brian, I think in a way that's a good place to stop, because this is a really good topic for a whole nother conversation.
Absolutely.
Because we've talked a little bit about asymmetries and how do you work with them in the erectors and the hamstrings. Haven't talked so specifically about the glutes. Talked a little bit about that last time. But I think discussing how asymmetries work, how to train asymmetrically, how to address the body asymmetrically would be really useful follow-on to this particular set of topics. So if you're up for that,
I love it.
We can think about that.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you guys very much for joining us. I know I learned a few things and reminded myself of a few things. And sometimes listening to this, I'm sure it's not that you're learning something new. Sometimes it's just being reminded of something you already know. And it's like, oh man, I haven't thought about that for a while. Yeah, on so-and-so, that's going to work real well. So this may be that. And in talking with Nora, oftentimes I'm reminded and think, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I need to include that in this or that person. So hopefully this inspired you a little bit. Do us a favor, hit us up. If you have any questions or comments, we really appreciate it on our Gmail account. movingconvos@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us. Check us out on Instagram at Moving Convos. Hit that like and subscribe, share, comment, all that kind of good stuff all over our social media. We would really appreciate it. And for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye, guys.